In 1519, European explorers stumbled upon a metropolis that seemed pulled from a dream. It had running water, massive botanical gardens, and spotlessly clean streets. At the time, major European hubs like London and Seville were fractions of that size and struggling with severe sanitation issues. The island city of Tenochtitlán housed over 200,000 people. Its geography was its greatest asset. Sitting in the middle of Lake Texcoco, it controlled a massive network of trade via thousands of canoes. If an enemy wanted to attack, they had to cross narrow, elevated causeways. It was an incredibly wealthy commercial powerhouse, operating out of a fortress made of water. For centuries, the popular historical narrative has been that roughly 500 Spanish soldiers arrived and effortlessly crushed an empire of millions. However, that traditional story is completely false. If you want to know how the most powerful empire in the Americas actually collapsed, hit the subscribe and like buttons below. We're going to look at the real history. The man leading the Spanish expedition, Hernán Cortés, was not a king or a high-ranking noble. He was an ambitious, risk-taking rebel who actively defied his superiors to reach Mexico. To make sure his men couldn't abandon the mission, he deliberately disabled his own ships on the coast. There was no going back. When Cortés and his men marched inland, the indigenous population faced a severe technological shock. The Spanish brought massive war dogs and rode on the backs of animals the locals had never seen before, horses. Even more intimidating was their metallurgy. The reflective steel armor and morion helmets made the invaders look like entirely alien beings. Tenochtitlan looked impenetrable, but that strength was fragile. The empire was about to be tested by an enemy that ignored every established rule of Mesoamerican warfare. When the Spanish reached the capital, Emperor Moctezuma II invited them inside. Later accounts often painted Moctezuma as a weak ruler who thought Cortés was a god. Modern historians see a very different reality. Moctezuma was a brilliant political strategist. By letting the invaders in, he bought time to observe them, study their weapons, and maintain control of the situation without triggering an immediate war. But Moctezuma's empire had a massive vulnerability. The Aztec system relied entirely on military dominance and extracting crushing tribute from subjugated cities. Neighboring tribes were forced to send huge amounts of food, luxury goods, and materials to Tenochtitlan, creating deep, simmering resentment across the region. This control was heavily reinforced through public rituals. The Aztecs believed human sacrifices were necessary to return the blood the gods had spilled to create the world, keeping the universe in balance. But practically, extracting a heart with a stone blade in front of a massive crowd was an incredibly effective tool of state terror. It sent a clear message to any vassal considering a rebellion. The Spanish soon realized how hated the Aztecs were, entirely thanks to an enslaved indigenous woman known as Doña Marina, or La Malinche. She spoke multiple local languages and served as Cortés's translator. She mediated meetings with local leaders, mapped out the political rivalries, and showed the Spanish exactly how to fracture the empire from the inside out. This brings us to the biggest misconception of the conquest. When Cortés marched, he wasn't relying solely on European swords. He was backed by tens of thousands of native warriors, most notably the Tlaxcaltecas. They had suffered through bloody wars and taxation under the Aztecs for years, and they saw the Spanish arrival as their best opportunity for liberation. Cortés did not conquer Mexico on his own. He positioned himself at the front of a massive, pre-existing indigenous rebellion. The fragile tension inside Tenochtitlan eventually snapped. Following a massacre of Aztec nobles by Spanish troops during a religious festival, the city erupted in open revolt. Moctezuma was killed in the chaos, and the Spaniards and their allies found themselves trapped inside the hostile capital. Their only option was a desperate midnight escape. On June 30th, 1520, they tried to slip out over the causeways under the cover of a heavy downpour. The Aztecs discovered them. What followed was an absolute slaughter. In the pitch black and driving rain, thousands of indigenous allies and hundreds of Spaniards were ambushed, dragged into the water, and killed. For many of the Europeans, their own greed killed them. Obsessed with the city's wealth, soldiers had stuffed their pockets and armor with massive amounts of stolen gold. As the fighting pushed them off the narrow bridges, the sheer weight of the precious metal pulled them straight to the bottom of the lake. The Spanish called it La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows. It was a brutal tactical victory for the Aztecs. But the Europeans had left something behind in the city that would prove far deadlier than any army. Before the Spanish even reorganized for a final military assault, an invisible weapon was already tearing Tenochtitlan apart: smallpox. This chart illustrates the catastrophic drop in the indigenous population. Because the people of the Americas had lived in isolation from the rest of the world for millennia, their immune systems had absolutely no defense against European pathogens. The virus swept through the dense urban population with terrifying speed. The disease didn't care about rank or skill. It killed key generals, priests, and political leaders, leaving the military's command structure shattered. As families died in their homes and the streets filled with the sick, the psychological resolve of the entire empire collapsed. Knowing the capital was severely weakened, Cortés returned with newly built warships for the lake and tens of thousands of indigenous allies. They systematically destroyed the aqueducts that supplied Tenochtitlan with fresh drinking water, cut off the food supply lines, and began a grueling block-by-block siege. The final Aztec emperor, a young warrior named Cuauhtémoc, mounted a fierce defense. His soldiers fought fiercely for every single street and temple, but they were fighting while starving, dehydrated, and ravaged by illness. The city was ultimately choked to death. Tenochtitlan fell to starvation, a naval blockade, and a microscopic virus long before the final swords clashed. On August 13, 1521, Cuauhtémoc was captured, marking the definitive political death of the Aztec Empire. Two deeply complex, entirely alien civilizations had collided, and one was left in ruins. But the indigenous culture was never fully erased. The Aztec language, food, and bloodlines survived, weaving themselves directly into the conqueror's society. Even today, the ancient stones of the Templo Mayor sit directly beneath the European streets of modern Mexico City. The Aztec Empire was brought down by a perfect storm. It was a victim of its own brutal tribute system, an invisible biological disaster, and an alliance of angry vassals guided by a ruthless invader. It is a harsh reminder that no system of power is permanently invincible. What do you think? Could Moctezuma have saved his empire if he had attacked the Spanish immediately? Or was their fall inevitable? Let us know down in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more history.